Hello chess community, it's Anna here with your weekly dose of middle game strategy. We are continuing with the topic of opposite side castling. Let me remind you of the previous sessions. We have studied some wonderful games, but my board has disappeared, so let's put the chessboard back where it belongs. And these are some of the games that we have seen. You must remember the Marusevich-Alexeyev position. The pawns are g5 and h5 already, and in this very position, white is to move, and Marusevich played g6. This is the pawn storm, the pawn break that we have learned in the previous sessions. And after bishop a5, a few moves later, we reach this position where black has captured the knight on c3, and Marusevich decided that who cares? I'm a piece down, but I will just go ahead on the king side with my attack. So this g6, h6, pawn storm was what we have learned. It's a very typical attacking idea, but we also saw in another game between Fischer and Spassky that it doesn't always work. So yes, we played for g6 in that game as well, but after bishop f6, the correct move here was not h6. h6 is a bad move here because black could capture on g6. With this, he closes the g file, and after h takes g7, he moves the rook away. Queen takes g7 doesn't work here because of bishop h6, so instead he plays rook e8, and here after queen h2, queen takes g7, protects the h7 pawn. There's a pawn on g6 too. Black is fine. Black is actually better in this position. I think I forgot to correct the title. It's not opposite side castling 2, but 3. This is already the third session. Let me just correct it because it isn't the second session that you have already studied, and we also had a thematic tournament, so that was really exciting. All of you guys were really good at attacking, and some of you even managed to defend that inferior position that we had in the previous unrated thematic tournament. Let me just correct this quickly if I can. You know how bad I am at IT things, but I think I will somehow find the title, which is here, and it should show a number 3. I'll try to put it here. If not, just imagine that it's there. Not sure I managed, but anyway, it's the third session, not the second. So let's just keep on talking about chess because that's the only good thing I know. That's the only thing I'm good at, I'm afraid. So that's why in this position, after g6, not h6, so don't just believe that you need to push g6 and h6, those two moves all the time. Sometimes they win the position, sometimes they don't. Sometimes, for instance, in this position, in Fischer's position, after g6, bishop f6, the good move is g takes h7 check, when the opponent will try to hide his king under your pawn, so he's using your pawn as a shield, but it will not work because sooner or later we will break through. So what happened in Fischer's game was a beautiful, beautiful way of making this black king vulnerable. He gives up the h7 pawn, and then he gave up the h6 pawn too, so what he needed to do was to make those pawns disappear. I hope that you remember these games. If you don't, you can still watch those episodes. They are all on the shows page. Actually, I wanted to show you 2 features on Chess24 that you should use if you want to study more chess. So let's just begin with how can you find the previous sessions about my strategy shows, Peter Svidler's Banter Bliss, anything you want to look up, anything that happened previously. All you need to do is open Chess24. I'll show you now with the website. And here you go to watch shows. Actually, that's where you should be right now if you're not on YouTube. And whatever you want to find, for instance, if you want to find my Middlegame shows, previous sessions, you just write here, for instance, Anna in the search. You can search for languages. Almost all my shows are in English, so you are likely to find it under English. And then you can see all these clips, all our previous sessions from the Middlegame shows. They are all there on Chess24, but also, of course, you can find Sopiko's videos, or Peter Svidler's, Jan's, anybody on Chess24. You can find it here under the Watch Shows tab. Another very, very useful feature that you will need if you want to study the games I have showed you in more depth. So you go to Learn and Analysis Coaching. And there you will find a database, a huge database with loads of games. And what this database will help you do, for instance, let's see a game. Actually, I will show you one more game. Well, what am I doing? Clicking here and there. Yeah, that's what that happens to me often. Sorry guys, I meant this tab. Let's go back to a game. For instance, the last game that we have seen is the Anna and Timman game, and that was also about the G6 pawn storm, G5, H5, G6. So in this position, this is a position that we have analyzed. It did not happen in the game, but it was a sideline. And what we learned here is that sometimes this knight will go to H5, and he wants to prevent our idea with H4, H5, G6. So this knight on H5 is blocking the H pawn's way. And that's where we learned that we can carry out this nice knight maneuver, bringing the knight to G3. In that way, we will exchange this knight on H5, and we will open the H file, so this knight will have nowhere to go. We also learned that you shouldn't really move this C3 knight, because that's the knight that is defending your king, especially if there's a pawn on C4. Do not touch that knight, because after castle knight G3, this C3 push is really annoying. But what I wanted to show you with the database tab is that if you want to analyze this position in more depth, because I cannot mention every line in the videos, but if you just want to replay them, analyze your own moves in these games, you can find these games in our database. So let's say that this game you like, Anna and Timman. What you will do is to go to the website. Here we are on Chess24 under the tab Learn, Analysis and Coaching, and what you need to do is go down here and you will find the database tab here. You click on it, and then let's search for Anand, because we want to find the Anand Timman game. Anand Viswanathan, search. It's got loads of games, so how can you find the Timman game? Well, let's find his opponent, Timman. There you go, Jan Timman. You see that they have played plenty of games, but we are looking for a game from 2004. There's only one game from 2004. So there you go, Anna Timman. This is the game that we have seen in the session. You can analyze it, you can replay it, you can go through it, you can save it as a PGN. Anything you want to do with the game, you have it. You just need to click on the database tab and save the game, analyze it, anything you like. And you can also use this database tab for ongoing events. Let's say that you are watching the Russian team championship. So we go to the Russian team championship, let's say the higher league, any league. What I want to show you is that sometimes you are curious whether this opening has been played before, what other games have been played in that opening. So let's go to, I will just click randomly on a game. It's not something concrete I want to show you, but for instance, Hismatulin Alexeyenko, we see that the opening, for instance, this position, let's make a few moves because there are many games in this position for sure. So this fianchetto system, and we transpose to a Catalan. So this is an open Catalan. Let's say that you want to find games in the open Catalan with the knight e5 line. So you go down here, down to where you see pairings, multiboard analysis, opening tree, and database. There you click on database, and you can see so many games in this position, starting from very recent games from April to loads of pages. So we have many games in this position. You can search, you can filter these games by color, result, year, rating, player, opponent, anything you like. This is what I wanted to show you before we begin, because many of you ask me all the time, how can you look up the games that I have showed you? So this is the way. You need to use the database tab on Chess24. Let's start with today's game, because it's not going to be about G6. It's gonna be still about the opposite side castling, as I have said, opposite side castling 3. And instead of pushing G6, we will now weaken the G7 square. Today's games are a game between a Chinese grandmaster and a Vietnamese, so it's Nihao against Dao Tien, I cannot pronounce it, that one, and another one between two Russian grandmasters. But let's begin with this one. We will skip the opening, but once again it's a Sicilian. And the position we care about is, we have seen this previously, this opening too, G4, yeah, opposite side castling. We both need to attack. White will attack on the king side, black will attack on the queen side, and so they do it. But what happens when our bishop is on G5? How do you continue? How can we attack with that bishop on g5? Let me know what you think about this position. I will let you think about it a bit. Good job, guys. Many of you have realized that you need to move the bishop away from g5 in order to push our pawn to g5. And that's not something easy to realize. I mean, it's easy if you know that you need to push the g-pawn. But this bishop on g5 looks like a good piece. It's an active piece on g5. So why would we want to move it again when we have in a position where we have an undeveloped bishop on f1, an undeveloped rook on h1? So some of you might have thought that I would prefer to move this light square bishop on f1 or the rook on h1. But the correct move is bishop e3. So yes, we are moving a piece twice. Once again, we move this bishop while we have undeveloped pieces, but it's because we need to push the g and h pawns. And we move it to e3 because if we go to h4, it's gonna be once again disturbing us. We need to push this pawn, the h pawn as well. So that's why we don't place it on h4. We need that square. And also, sometimes there are tricks with knight e4 and this then bishop could be hanging on h4. But besides that, even if this pawn, this knight takes e4 would not be possible in the position, you don't want to place your bishop on h4 when you want to push the h pawn. So let's move the bishop somewhere where it doesn't disturb us, bishop e3, and then the pawns can go ahead. b5, black does the same. And in this position, very important, once again, we have seen this in previous sessions, at least in one of them I mentioned it, so I would like to know who remembers it or who can guess it. What would you play here, h4 or g5? Quick question, think about it for a moment. my microphone. So, sorry guys, today is not my day. I'm clicking here and there. I think I muted my microphone and then I forgot to unmute it. Now you should be hearing me, so I will repeat what I was saying. I said, I'm sorry. Today I'm really clumsy. What I said was that g5 is the good move, and congratulations to everyone who have said g5, because we will push both pawns, g5 and h4, but it does matter which one we start with. So g5 is a forcing move, it attacks the knight, and you will see how important it is to chase away that knight from f6. If we go h4 first, that's not a forcing move. Yes, we will push that pawn, but not here. That's not the best move. Move order is very important in many positions. So h4 is not the best because of knight takes, bishop takes, or queen takes. The same e5 and d5, or d5 here in this position. Both are possible. And also after queen takes, same thing, d5. As I said, when there's a flank attack, so white is attacking on the king side, the opponent, in this case black, should either counterattack on the queen side or he should counterattack in the center. And if you can launch a counterattack in the center, that's huge, because as you know, the center is the most important part of the chessboard. So if you control the center, if you are attacking in the center, that means trouble for white. Not that he is lost in this position, no, but this counterplay is sufficient. This position is unclear. So let's not let the opponent do this. Let's not let him play d5 in this position. h4 is inaccurate because it allows this d5 push either here or after e5, d5. And it seems like even if we win the pawn, for instance in this variation, white wins the pawn on d5. But it's just for a moment, because black will regain this pawn on d5 and his position is more than fine. I think I would prefer black in this position. You have the semi-open c file, you will capture on d5. There's no problem at all in this position. So make sure that you are accurate. You always push g5, almost always push it. Don't take my word for it, but most of the times you will push g5 first. You will chase the knight away from f6, and depending on where it goes, it might go to h5, it might go to d7 or e8. e8 is usually the most passive, but depending on how the opponent reacts, you will also decide what to do. If he goes to h5, just like in the Vichy game, what we have seen is that this knight, you will need to find a way to attack this knight. So sometimes it's gonna be a knight maneuver. Here it could be the c knight, because there's no c4 pawn. You could carry this knight to g3, or it could be bishop e2 and f4. Perhaps that's what I would play in this position, because in that way you develop the bishop too. But that's a different story, because what happened in the game was g5, knight d7, and here h4, knight f8. Some of you have asked me in the previous session what happens if the opponent plays knight f8 and doesn't allow us play g6. So this is actually the answer to everyone who have asked me that question. Yes, sometimes the opponent will place the knight on f8, and that's a good defending piece. So as black, I would definitely place the knight there. If I cannot have my knight on f6, I want to have it on f8 so that I can protect the h7 square and also the g6 square, and my king doesn't feel lonely. With the knight on f8, it's much more difficult to play g6, to break through with that, because there's a pawn on f7, a pawn on h7, and the knight on f8. It's unlikely that that will work out very well for us. Sometimes it can, of course, but in this position we will play for something else. After b4, actually I want to ask you, what would you play here with white in this position? And then I will continue talking about what I've just started saying. What would you play here after b4? Tell me, guys. let's discuss this because most of you have been mentioning moves like knight a4 and knight e2. In this position, of course, it's always a question whether we should place the knight on a4, trying to block the opponent's pawn, the a pawn, so that we prevent a5, a4. But the disadvantage of this move is what happens in case of knight h5 as well, that this knight might be attacked, so there you should counter moves like bishop d7, and later this knight could be hanging on a4 and it doesn't really have a good square to retreat to. So in this position I wouldn't play knight a4. It's not a bad move, but knight ce2 seems to be a better option, safer option. Later on you can choose whether this knight will join the attack with knight f4 or knight g3, or if you need to defend you can bring it back to c1, so it's gonna work in the same way as this knight on f8. But what happened in the game, and that's why my question was tricky, I'm sorry. After b4, Nihao, because I think I said Nihao, that's Wang Hao, I always mess up Chinese names. So Nihao, playing with the white pieces in a rapid game, he just said that I don't need to move the knight. So yes, knight e2 was a good move, knight a4 is also still an advantage for white. But the best move here is what Nihao did, and that is h6. Yes, h6. He just doesn't care about this c3 knight, and the reason is actually not as complicated as it seems. If black captures the knight on c3, then black is lost after queen takes c3. We will be threatening mate on g7, and the knight is hanging on c6, and on top of that it is pinned. And that's very important that the knight is pinned, because if the queen was not hanging on c7, black could play here knight e5, and that would cover the diagonal, the a1 aj diagonal, prevent mate, save the knight. But it's not possible here to play knight e5. The queen would be hanging on c7. It's a pretty combination, isn't it? So after b4, I know that I didn't warn you, and I would have played knight e2 here with white, so don't worry. h6 is a grandmaster move. Even in a rapid game, this Chinese grandmaster found h6. For them it's not difficult, for them it might be like child's play, but yes, he saw that this knight cannot be captured, because after queen takes c3, even if you protect the knight on c6 with moves like bishop b7, doesn't help. We don't even need to capture on c6. You can play like knight b5, threatening mate on g7, and also threatening to capture the queen, so white is winning. Just make sure that you don't blunder with moves like knight takes e6, because sometimes I have a feeling that when we are in a winning position, especially when it's about a beautiful tactical blow, we just get really excited about winning in a beautiful way, and we might play quickly and like I'm crushing my opponent. Make sure that you take your time, you calm down, take a deep breath, and do not blunder, because spoiling a completely winning position is the most painful thing in the world. What can happen to you in the chessboard at least. So do not play knight takes e6. Yes, the idea is the same, but after knight takes e6, this g7 pawn is protected. I know that you can see this, but sometimes it happens to us that we become too excited about winning the game. Let's just always keep calm our mind, and then you can play the best moves. After h6, the opponent played knight e5, and now once again it's your turn to think. What would you do here? Would you move the knight away from c3, or would you play something else? I think now you will suspect the answer. Good job, everyone! At least those who have said either knight e2 or h takes g7. Okay, maybe even knight a4. So actually you couldn't make a mistake. But let's just emphasize that the strongest move in this position is not a knight move. Once again, what a surprise! When you are attacking, many times you will sacrifice pieces and you will not care about what's happening on the queen side because all you care about is the king side. So once again, we don't care about the hanging c3 knight. That's the best move. H takes g7, and that's what happened in the game, of course. H takes g7, and well, in this case it wasn't that difficult to find. It's not a hidden thing. We are actually not sacrificing a piece because the f8 knight is hanging too. So many times when you are attacked, think about counterattacking first. If you can attack a piece of the same value or of a higher value, or give a check, threaten mate, those threats are bigger than the threat that your opponent is causing to you. So in this case, our knight is hanging, but we can threaten the opponent's knight or his king or more. We will see. After h takes g7 was sure that his knight is hanging and his king is getting really weak without the g7 pawn, without the black pawn on g7. This king side is horrible. So this position is winning for white. And let's see how Nihao managed to win it. After king takes g7, he played knight a4. You can also go to e2, both are good. The funny thing is that in this position too, he could have played a move that's once again a move that just goes with the attack, and as I said, who cares about the hanging c3 knight when we have a king like this on the board? So white's attack is crushing. He could have played knight f5 check already, sacrificing another knight. Well, not another knight, we are not a piece down yet, but two of our knights are hanging in this position, and yes, it's winning because after knight f5 check, e takes, we have this beautiful square on d5 for the knight. That's the best ever outpost for a knight. Having the knight on d5 without c-pawn, without e-pawn, that means that this is an outpost, and that's a beast on d5. This knight is just the best ever you could have. And after queen d7, simply e takes f5. The point is that the queen cannot capture it because the bishop would be hanging on e7, and if you cannot capture the f5 pawn, then look at those pawns, f5, g5. We also have the h5 for the rook, the bishop on e3, the queen on d2, and this beast on d5. So we have loads of great attacking pieces, and this position is lost for black. We are threatening f6 right now, or knight takes e7 and f6. Those threats are huge, and on top of that we can always play queen h2, queen h6, all those threatening moves, threatening mate in a few moves, that's for sure. This position is hopeless, completely hopeless. But let's not forget that this is a rapid game, so we cannot expect the best moves all the time from both players. Actually, black made a mistake few moves back before because this position is lost already. Knight a4 is a good move too, so I don't really blame Nihao for moving the knight that was hanging. And the king on g7 is still horrible, and it will always be horrible. The only thing you should prevent is exchanging too many pieces. Remember that you need the queen, especially if you want to give mate to the opponent. So let's just avoid any exchanges. If you keep the pieces on the board, this king on g7 will not survive, that's for sure. What you need to see after playing knight a4 is what happens in case of bishop d7, because whenever you want to place the knight on a4, or in case of playing with black, the knight on h5, you need to see what will happen to that knight if it's attacked, because it's cool that we are blocking the pawn. Yes, good job. But what about bishop d7 in this position? What will you do with that knight? Let me know what you think about this position. Sorry guys, the microphone, once again, I muted it and muted, unmuted, then muted again. Clicking here and there today is not my best day in terms of IT things. Please excuse me. I will say now once again what I have just said. Is it April the 1st or what's going on? Because nothing is working out for today, for me at least. Anyway, let's repeat what I have just said. So I was praising all of you for playing knight b6 because that's a great move. It's a discovered attack. If black captures the knight on b6, let's go back to that position. So bishop d7, knight b6, that's a great move. Cannot be captured because either knight e6 or knight f5 wins the queen. And if black cannot capture the knight, then he has to go rook a b8, after which we have several good moves. We can, for instance, ignore the hanging knight on b6 and go for sacrifices with knight f5. Once again, yeah, because there's this motive, this knight d5 motive. It's always so painful for black to have this knight on d5 that many times, as you can see in this position, you can sacrifice a piece for having this beast on d5 in the center. So yeah, that would actually win back the bishop on e7, so it's just a temporary piece sacrifice. And well, if you don't want to go this crazy, you can also capture the bishop on d7 and then carry on with your attack. Actually, there was a question before about the same idea that I showed here after, in this position where Nihao played knight a4 and I mentioned that he could have gone knight f5 check and after e takes knight d5. And the question was, what happens if queen b7? I think as the Bats has asked me. So that's a very good question because in that case, of course, we don't have e takes f5 because the bishop could capture this pawn. We don't have those beautiful pawns. We cannot push f6 anymore. So here, of course, we shouldn't play e takes f5, but the position is still winning. It's a piece down, we are not winning back the piece, we cannot create those strong pawns by playing e takes f5, but what we do have is queen h2, and this position, why am I drawing with yellow? I prefer green for strong moves like this. The threat is queen h6, and after the king moves, we have knight f6 all the time, so this position is once again lost. I know sometimes it's difficult to believe that with a piece down and making moves like queen h2, which is not a big threat for the moment because we cannot capture on h7. But yes, after queen h6, black's king is gonna be mated in a few moves. So yeah, this position is completely lost for black. It's a piece up for black, but he cannot do anything with his piece up. Look at these pieces on the queen side. They're not really useful for the king side. They are not helping black prevent mate on the other flank. So that's why this position is lost. Let's see what happened in the game because I want to show you another game too and I go too much into details and also I have these technical issues of muting, unmuting, clicking here and there, not my day, sorry. Knight a4, rook b8, preventing knight b6, so now black is threatening bishop d7, attacking our knight and we have nowhere to go with the knight. So in this position, what would you do? You know that black wants to play bishop d7, attacking your knight on a4. What will we do about it? Can we prevent that move? Can we prepare for that move? Or shall we do something on the opposite flank? Let me know what you think about this position. let's discuss your ideas, because there's a safe way and there's a let's go for it way. So the safe way, the safe continuation is b3 here. In this position you can go b3. Many of you have said it, so that's a good move actually, b3. And in case of bishop d7, if you don't want to allow bishop takes a4, which is still not the end of the world, but if you don't want to destroy your own pawn structure, I do care a lot about pawn structure, so I would definitely consider knight b2. Yes, we are retreating the knight, but after these defending moves b3 and knight b2, we will now focus on the king side, so black has really no attack on the queen side after these b3 and knight b2 moves. Yes, it's time, we have used 2 tempi for playing these moves, but still, if you want to play it safe, if you don't want to just go ahead on the king side, not caring about the queen side, then you can play b3 and knight b2. And this position is really, really safe. You can see that everything is under control on the queen side, while black's king side is still and will always be horrible. So black doesn't have sufficient counterplay here. He would need to play a lot of moves like rook c8 and pushing the a pawn, and those are loads of moves to create something against the white king. You can play b3, that was one of the solutions. And if you want to go bold, you want to act immediately, you can play actually after rook b8 f4, because as we have said, when you want to prevent something, or when something is hanging, for instance a piece is hanging, you can, instead of moving that piece, you can just attack another piece of the same value or a piece of a higher value. So here actually white has acted before the threat happened. Black hasn't played bishop d7 yet, the knight is not hanging on a4 yet, but he just says f4, your knight is hanging on e5, so let's see what you do about it. And bishop d7 could be a counterattack. Now both knights are hanging, and in this position f5, I know it's crazy, we might think that f takes e5 is the best move because that knight was hanging. Of course you can consider it, there's nothing wrong with f takes e5, but f5 instead of f takes e5 is even stronger because we are threatening f6, so we will win the e7 bishop and we will create a pawn on f6, or we will manage to open files against the black king. This position is crazy, so if you prefer to play it safe, then after rook b8 you go b3, and as I have said, you can even retreat the knight if you don't want to allow bishop takes a4. If you want to attack immediately, then you go f4. It depends on your style. f4, and in case of bishop d7, this is the game actually. So Nihao played f5 after bishop d7, not caring about the hanging knight. Bishop takes a4, f6, and after king g8, now guess what he did? Do you think he captured the bishop on e7? Do you think he cared about that bishop on e7 at all? Like, he's a piece down, but of course he doesn't want to capture the bishop. So which move do you think he played in this position if it's not f takes e7? Congratulations, guys. Yes. It's queen h2. We go queen h2 and the plan is simple. We're gonna go queen h6 and give mate on g7, and that's the reason why Nihao didn't want to capture the bishop on e7, because what he wants is to have this giant pawn on f6. It's such a powerful pawn. It's one of our best attacking pieces in this position, so if you don't have a beast knight on d5, then have a pawn on f6. That's great. We are threatening mate on g7 in 2 moves. Queen h6, queen g7 would be mate. We don't care about the e7 bishop, so even if the opponent plays something like rook d8, threatening to play bishop d8, saving the bishop, who cares about the bishop? It's mate on g7, you cannot prevent it. That's why in this position, after queen h2, black played knight g4, attacking the queen and also covering the h6 square, but after queen h4, now the knight is hanging. The bishop is still hanging, so yes, we are a piece down, but we will capture that piece sooner or later, or we give mate first. That's even better. So of course moves like knight takes e3, once again, lose the game on the spot, because after queen h6, yes, you have a few checks with black, bishop takes c2 for instance, but after king a1, black can resign. Black can and should resign. So this isn't the game. Of course, after queen h4, black tried to fight with rook d c8, attacking the c2 pawn, and he would not mind moves like f takes e7 or queen takes g4. They might be good, but Nihao played in an even stronger way. He played bishop d3, just preventing anything happening against the c2 pawn. So yes, he could have taken the knight on g4. Maybe that was better. Maybe here queen takes g4 is the best. Doesn't really matter what the engine evaluation will tell you, because this is a game, so it's a game between two humans. It doesn't have to be always the first move of the engine. If you want to analyze it with the engine, you can. I showed you how to use the learn coaching analysis and coaching tab, and in that the database, so you can find all these games. It's a huge and very fast database, the fastest online database, and with millions of games, so you should definitely use the database tab, whether you are watching a live tournament or if you want to analyze any of these games or your own games. Make sure that you use that tab. It's very useful if you want to improve your chess. So you can check all these variations with the engine after finding the game in the database. But what I want to show you is how the game finished, because it was rook d c8, bishop d3, e5, and in this position moves like knight f5 look good, but if you enter in positions like this, you just need to make sure that after this bishop takes c2, bishop takes, queen takes c2, your king is safe. And yes, it was a check, it looked dangerous, but after king a1, our king is once again cool on a1. There's no check, no other checks. And you might think that after queen takes e4, black has managed to protect everything and he's fine, but no, he's not fine, because the queen is unprotected on e4, so knight h6 would win the game. This is a long combination that would have won, and after king h8, f takes e7, it's a mess, I know. So this is just to demonstrate how powerful white's attack is. You can even allow bishop takes c2 after a move like knight f5, but what Nihao did is a safer option. And why not to play safe if you can make moves like b3. He played b3, and after bishop d7, knight f5 now in this position, and this, it's just really hopeless for black. Let's see how it finished. Actually, before knight f5, remember that we didn't really want to capture this bishop on e7, because in all those positions, like if I go back to f6, king g8, we never really wanted to capture this bishop, because after queen takes e7, black has quite many defending pieces, so it was not a good trade to trade this powerful pawn on f6 for a bishop on e7 and bringing the opponent's queen to the king side, because the queen is actually a powerful defending piece too, not only an attacking piece. Imagine that you have this queen on the king side, so it will always threaten to exchange white's queen. That's why having the queen close to your king when it's under attack is something useful. So a queen in the defense is also powerful, not only in the attack. Of course, you don't want to defend pawns with the queen, but to prevent any mate threats against your king, you need the queen many times. That's why it wasn't a good move. But we are not talking about this position anymore. What we care about now is after bishop d7, actually f takes e7 was the simplest win because there's no queen takes e7. And if black cannot take this pawn on e7, then we are threatening to capture the knight on f8. If the knight has to move from f8, then he will be mated with queen takes h7. So actually this was a very simple tactical, not even a tactic, because the bishop is hanging, it has been hanging forever, but maybe Nihao just thought that he will never capture it because he wants to keep the pawn on f6. Sometimes you need to change this pattern in your mind. When the bishop is on d7, cuts the connection between the queen and the bishop on e7. So f takes e7 would have won on the spot because we have recovered the piece. The knight is hanging on f8 and mate will come on h7. That was the simplest. But let's see what happened in the game, because that's also pretty. Knight f5, bringing one more attacking piece, and after bishop takes, e takes, still the bishop is hanging on e7, the knight is hanging on g4, everything is still hanging. And after queen takes, e4. Now, once again, as usual, Nihao did not care about the hanging piece that's on the queen side, that bishop. Who cares about that bishop? He just went g6. And yes, it's winning. It's not as simple as the f takes e7 would have been after bishop d7, but it's winning. If knight takes g6 here, then it's gonna be a mate in few moves. And I will let you calculate here. After king h8, what would you play here? Quick! Well done, guys. It's mate in 3 with many moves. 2 different ways, but let's play the most powerful one. Rook takes h7, and after king takes queen f7 and king h8, queen g7 mate. That's a beautiful tactical motive. I think it wasn't difficult to see, but what's difficult about these games is not how the finish is. What's difficult is that he was sacrificing a piece for like 10 moves. Like he sacrificed way back before in this position where you saw that the knight was hanging on on c3 after b4, and he just pushed h6. Yes, it's true that the knight could not be taken immediately, but he had to see this tactical motive. We all had to see it. And after bishop b7, knight b5. So later what happened is that he kept on sacrificing in this position too, but could have sacrificed with knight f5. And later f4, and in this position, when the knight was hanging on a4, he just kept pushing this pawn, f5, not caring about the a4 knight. So those moves are a lot more difficult than the finish, but the finish is the most beautiful, and of course we all love to give mate. So let's see how the game ended actually, because I was just showing you that this is what could have happened. What happened in the game after g6 was f takes, and bishop takes f6. And here too, white is winning simply after g takes h7. The king has to go to f7, and here there are many different ways to win, so I will just show you what happened in the game. There are many good moves. I'm sure you would find a way. One of the ways to win this position, bishop g5, threatening bishop takes f6 and h8. Another queen appearing on the board. And after knight d7, he simply played queen takes d5. Now the e4 pawn is hanging with a check. And after the e4 pawn falls, it's not about the pawn, it's about the king. So the king will have no shelter. Imagine that everything opens up, and that's what happened after e takes d3, rook e1. Game over, black resigned, because if he plays something like knight e5, doesn't help, he cannot cover the e file. It's all over. And also in this position, we were also threatening bishop takes f6. This is completely lost. And now, of course, we have one more game. But before we see that, just remember this position. Remember that when the knight is on f8, it's a very good piece to prevent g6. The pawn push with g6, we want to break through, we want to open the g file, the h file, anything we can open on the king side. We need open files to attack the black king. But if the knight is on f8, that's a good defending piece. I would definitely place the knight there, and if I'm white, I might want to have a knight on c1, depending on which flank you castle, of course, depending on the colors. Black could also castle queen side, and then you would play king b8, knight c8. If you have time to place the knight there, then it's pretty nice. If you cannot have a knight on f6, have it on f8. It protects many squares, the h7 square and the g6 square, and it protects your king. In other positions, you would want to have the bishop on f8 because, especially in this position after h6, the problem with the knight on f8 is that you cannot place now your bishop on f8, and when the g7 square is weak, because the h6 move weakens the g7 square, so it's either that we will capture the pawn or the g7 square will be weak. Just imagine a move like g6. Now the g7 square is horribly weak. If we can somehow manage to land our queen on g7, that will be mate, obvious. So in these positions you would want to have the bishop on f8, and you cannot because the knight is on f8. Also, if you had the bishop on f8, then this h6 move would not be that dangerous because you might capture back on g7 with the bishop. Anyway, that's a different story. All I wanted to say that the knight on f8 has pros and cons. So yes, it protects the h7 square and the g6 square, but sometimes if the opponent can, he will try to create an attack against the g7 pawn, which in this case is the weakness. That's the weakest spot in black's camp, and that's what white attacked. Let's see one more game where white attacks the g7 spot in the castle, and this is the game between two Russian grandmasters from the same year. My favorite opening, the French defense. I never talk about openings, but since the French is my favorite, I will just mention one thing in this position. It's the main line of the French with knight c3, and here in this position, of course, black has castled king side, that's normal, and white wants to castle many times. He wants to castle queen side. He can choose castle king side with bishop e2 castle king side, but if you want to castle queen side, very important that you don't castle immediately, because in that case black can play c4, and this pawn is very important. It's already on the 4th rank. The b pawn will join soon, b5, b4, so it will be black who is ahead in attack. This position is still unclear and is nothing special according to engines, but I think I wouldn't play this position ever with white because it's so much easier for black to just push b5, b4. Even if the pawn is hanging on b5, you will push b5 because in case of a knight takes b5 move, you will have the b file open. So whether you have this pawn captured on b5 or you manage to push it to b4, this position is really nice, this attack for black on the queen side. I do prefer black's attack here. Black's attacking chances are great after c4. That's why it's important, if you want to castle queen side in the French, you capture this pawn first, and after bishop takes, you can castle immediately. That's one of the lines. Or you can go bishop takes c5. Depends on your taste. Both are possible, but it's important to eliminate the pawn first and then castle. So this is still theory. Queen a5, h4, bishop d7, h5, and here black made a mistake. The mistake is strange that it's a mistake because he played a natural move, rook fd8. He wants to bring the rooks, one rook on d8, the other rook on c8. So why do you think it could be a mistake? What's wrong with rook d8? What can white do here? What's wrong about this move? Let me know what you think. Congratulations, guys! Yes, those of you who have said that the problem with Rook d8 is that it's not an attacking move, so it actually loses a tempo, you are completely right. Rook d8 seems to be a natural move. It seems like, why not to have this rook on d8, the other rook on c8? Too slow! It's too slow! Black doesn't have time for these kind of things. So yes, h6 is coming immediately, because that's what we want. In this position, White wants to weaken the g7 square. So yes, we could push g4, g5, g6, but not in this position. In this position, it's a lot stronger to play h6, because that's what we want. We want to weaken the g7 square. So you don't always need to push both pawns. It depends on what's the objective. That's what I wanted to show you with this game. So here, all we need to do is push the h pawn. Started here, push, push, push. That's it. Because once you push h6, if black has to go g6, now that's quite weak. Black doesn't have a dark squared bishop. If you can manage to bring the queen, that's gonna be mate. Yes, it's not mate immediately, and yes, black can defend, but it's still really unpleasant. So h6, weakening the dark squares because there is no dark square bishop. That happens many times in the French. All that black has here is the bad bishop, the large square bishop. The d7 bishop can never ever dream about defending the g7 square or helping out the king on g8. So bad luck for black, but h6 is a very strong move here. You don't need to push g4 because that's not our objective here. We don't care about pushing this guy because what we want is to play h6, not g5, g6. That's too slow. Actually here black would be already better because remember, against the flank attack you either counterattack on the other flank or in the center, and now the rook would be very useful on d8. d4 is a great move in this position, and in case of knight takes, you can capture. And look at this position, just moving the bishop away. The rook is hanging on h1, the queen is hanging on d4, everything collapsing. So just because we made a move that seems to be attacking, g4 seems to be like, yes, we are going, we are active, we are there, pawn storm. Well, pawn storms don't always mean that you need to push all the pawns. You just need to find the best pawns for the pawn storm. Does it make sense to find the best pawns for the pawn storm? What I mean is that you need to have the objective clear. So what do we want to weaken in this position? We want to weaken the dark squares. You know that's the word I like the least in chess. Dark squares. Yeah, manage dark squares. So we want to weaken the g7 square. That's why we push just the h pawn. We will not push the g pawn. That's too slow, and black will counterattack in the center. Black is better in this position. Make sure that you don't lose time for moves that are not as useful, that are not so useful for your attack. So g4 is not a good move here, but h6, yes. And that's why actually now you need to think about what was the good move instead of rook d8. Now that you know that rook d8 is bad because of h6, and it sounds like I want to tell you that h5, what black has to do is h6. It's possible, but if you are a French defense player with black, you know that most of the times you will allow this pawn to appear on h6, you will allow white to play h6, then you will push g6 and you will survive. But you can only survive if you have counterplay on the queen side. So how to create counterplay on the queen side as quickly as possible? No rook d8, no h6. h6 is possible. The engines play h6. I don't like that move. I want to counterattack immediately on the queen side. Tell me a move, even if it's a brave move, how to counterattack quickly right now on the queen side. Well done, guys! Everyone who said b5, you are great. b5 is the best move in this position. I can even quote, I think I should quote SD Bias on b5. He said that it's b5 and put some black stripes under your eyes, preparing for war. That's the spirit. So b5, we go all in. We want to attack that king on b1, on c1. It's almost on b1, but on the queen side. So yes, b5 is the best move. Such a powerful move, and we don't care that this pawn is hanging. If white goes h6, we will always push g6. We don't want it any opening, any h5 open, any g5 open. Yes, the g7 square is weak, but if we have sufficient counterplay on the queen side, then it doesn't matter, because the white queen will not have 3 tempi to go to f6, because it would mean queen f2, queen g3, queen g5, and then queen f6. It's even more, a lot of moves. And if white doesn't have time for that, it's because we are attacking his king. That's why b5 is very important. So yes, our king is a bit shaky on g8, but it's compensated by our counterplay on the queen side b5, and if the pawn is taken, we don't care. Knight b4. Now the bishop is hanging on b5, the pawn on a2 is hanging with a check. This position is really complicated, and I like black because now it's black who is attacking. We are a pawn down, but we have opened the b5, the c5 was already open, we have the queen on a5, knights on b4, c5, and the rooks are coming to b8 and c8. I think this position is really interesting, so this is what black should have played after h5, and not rook fd8, which is too slow. h6, this position is already really good for white, I think. I believe that even if you play g6 here, which is what is typical for French players, we always play after h6, g6. This is with the combined with rook fd8, I think it's too slow. And queen e1 threatening queen h4, then queen f6. So in this position, you would have to move the rook again, just to prevent the mate. And it's important to prevent mate, but come on, we have just played rook d8 and then we go rook c8, so it's clearly not something that black did well. Rook d8 was a bad move. Even rook c8, rook fc8 would have been a better move. If you see this position and you see that black has just moved the rook twice, because you need to bring back the queen in order to prevent queen h4, queen f6. So something has gone bad already for black. After h6, the position is not very pleasant. Visacin played bishop e8, but in this position, I will ask you, because there's a move that Nair played with white, and there's another move that I like even more. So the mission is to attack the g7 square, of course, and we should attack it with the queen, I believe, if we want to give mate. How to bring the queen to g7? What's the most effective way to bring the queen there? How can we attack this pawn? Let's see if your answers are correct, because I think many of you, most of you, have found the move that Grandmaster Nair played. And that should be a compliment, because he's a strong Grandmaster, also coaching the top Russian players. So he played f5, and many of you have said that move. There's nothing wrong with that move, only that it is not the best. So it's an attacking move. You are preparing for queen g5. So this seems to be the most active. I think that's why he played it, because it seems to be like the best move for sure. The funny thing is that in this position, it's not the most active looking move that is the best. There's a problem with f5. Well, it's not a problem, but it's that it's not winning. If black had responded with g6, then queen g5, the idea behind f5, is not working, because in this position, black can go knight e4, and you might wonder, what? I will take it and queen f6. But yeah, I'll take it and queen f6, and then rook takes d1, check, and queen d8, check, and we can basically resign. If not immediately, a few moves later, because our queen is being exchanged and our knight is hanging on f3. That's a disaster. I know it's not forced, but the idea behind f5 is that we play queen g5. And unfortunately for white, I also would have played f5, because it seems to be so tempting. It's not a bad move, but it's not a winning move, because if black plays g6 immediately, then, as I said, queen g5 doesn't win. There's knight e4 in the position, so you have to go something like knight takes, d takes, and here, not queen f6, but rook takes d8, exchange queens, and that's a different story. We are not giving mate anymore. So sometimes the active looking moves are not the best. That's one lesson to learn, also for me, because I think I would have pushed f5. Don't worry if you have said f5, and the grandmaster playing with white also went for this move. So what was the right move here? What was the best move? What was the strongest attacking move? A silent move like queen f2. Yeah, I know. It's a bit sad, because f5 seems to be a lot stronger. We are attacking, we are sacrificing the pawn. Black can capture the pawn on f5. All we care about is queen g5. But it was a lot better to bring the queen from f2 to g3 and then attack on g7. The difference, there's a big difference. In case of knight e4, we have queen h4. So with the pawn on f5, in all these positions, f5, g6, well, first of all we want here is queen g5, and also if after f5, knight e4, if the g5 square is taken away from our queen, we cannot really go anywhere as deadly as g5. So queen g5 was our main idea, and we cannot place the queen on the h file in this position. That's the big difference with queen f2, because here, no matter that black prevents queen g3, we have our second plan was queen h4, h takes g7, and mate on h7. So actually I was tricky, because I asked you, how can you attack the g7 pawn? And you found it, because it was f5, queen g5. That seems to be the best. But queen f2 is better, because it doesn't only prepare for queen g3, but it also has a second plan. Plan B is queen h4 and mate on h7. And in the game, after f5, of course, as I always say, humans, we all make mistakes. So Vysochin played knight e4, trying to prevent queen g5, which is a mistake. So f5 was not a mistake, but not the best move, but he responded to it just very badly. And that's what happens many times when we are being attacked. I think it's a lot more difficult to defend correctly all the time than to attack, because attack can be carried out by listening to your intuition, basically. I think you cannot go really bad if you listen to your intuition. Going all in, even that can work many times, even when the attack is not objectively good. Many times you win games just because you are attacking, and to defend you have to be like an engine. You have to be cold all the time, cool-minded, never worry, never really believe that you're gonna lose, because once you think that your position is lost, you will really lose it, even if the position is not lost. So I think defending correctly is a lot more difficult than attacking. You can practice defending if you lose good positions, if you lose whenever your king is under attack. Try to practice defending. Try to, first of all, psychologically, I always have a problem with that word, psychologically. Try to accept, first of all, that you are under attack, that your king is being attacked. And once you accept it, you can start thinking objectively about the position, bringing more defending pieces, or if you can, then create a counterattack against the opponent's king, because he also has a king. So don't worry that much about being mated. If you can create a counterattack, that's always a good recipe. But that was a lot of blah 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 talking. I can talk a lot. Knight e4 is a mistake, and the reason is that in this position we will not play knight takes e4. That would be a horrible move. Knight takes e4. Well, because we don't want to go for positions like this. I mean, not that it's... Yeah, well, I wanted to say not that it's lost. Yeah, it's close to being lost, because once again, a queen is hanging, the knight is hanging, we have to exchange queens. Then rook takes d1 can be also played first, and then he captures the queen, and then the knight is hanging on f3, our pawns are hanging. Nothing good can come out of this, so we are either worse, or in best case we can make a draw. Knight e4, we don't want to capture that knight, but then what shall we play here if knight takes e4? Let's discuss this position, because I see many of you being really enthusiastic about a queen sacrifice. Sometimes it can work, but you need to calculate it a lot before you make moves like h takes g7, giving up the queen. The idea is that if knight takes d2, then f6, and you want to play bishop d3, bishop h7, it's a great idea. I really appreciate it. It would be a beautiful mate, but I think it has various ways to actually prevent the idea. So bishop d3, bishop takes h7 is what white would play if it was his turn, but if black goes back to e4 with the knight, then he's just blocking that diagonal. So that would be one of the ways to refute this variation for white. Make sure that before you sacrifice a queen, you calculate it, because it's a good idea. It would have been a beautiful mate. We only lack one tempo to carry out, or maybe two tempi, but anyway, you should consider moves like that. Of course, it's great if you can see something like this, very creative, but not in this position. In this position, the simple move wins. Well, actually wins not on the spot, but it's a winning position after queen f4. The point is that if black goes knight takes c3, just like in many of the games we have seen in the More Savage game or in today's game, Nihao's game, white will not care about this piece, that a piece has just been captured, we are a piece down, and we just go queen g5, because who cares that we are a piece down when we are giving mate? We can be two pieces down or two rooks down. whatever. If we give mate, nobody cares. But make sure that you calculate it. Once again, if you sacrifice, you need to calculate it precisely. There are some checks. So knight takes a2, king b1. The knight can go back to c3. We have to capture it if we don't want to accept a draw. And after queen b6, you just need to make sure that you can hide your king somewhere. So whether it's king c1, and here there are no more checks. So actually this was not difficult to see, but you need to calculate all these lines till the end. And after g6, queen f6, it's just, there's no way after rook d2 to give more checks for black, and no way to prevent the mate on g7. So that's the point. After queen f4, knight takes c3. Who cares about the piece down? Queen g5, and that's it. There's no way to prevent mate, and there's no perpetual. Just always make sure that you calculate it. I know that sometimes these lines are long, but they are quite forced. All these checks are forced, and after rook d2 you can clearly see that there are no more checks and no way to protect the g7 square, so it's winning. That's why after queen f4, Vysochin tried knight b4, and here a very interesting move appeared on the board. I don't ask you to guess it because there are more good moves, like one of the best moves here is h takes g7, and that's just a really normal move. I mean, it's a powerful move, it's perhaps the best move in the position, but I think we can all guess it, h takes g7. Instead, Nair went really creative, and maybe it's not objectively the best move that he played, but certainly deserves quite a lot of praise. He played bishop c4. It's because knight b4 attacks the a2 pawn, so what black wants now is knight takes c3, and after knight takes c3, it's not just that it's a piece down, but he is threatening very many checks, if not mate some moves later with knight b a2. That's why he thought that, okay, you're attacking my pawn with one more knight, then I'm gonna protect it. And yes, that bishop is hanging, but it isn't really hanging, because after d takes c4, the knight is hanging on e4. And this is what happened in the game, because after bishop c4, it's really difficult for black to find a different move. If knight takes c3, then it's similar once again after queen g5. We don't care if it's a piece down, because after knight takes c2, it's gonna be the same. We can play bishop takes a2. That's why he played bishop c4, so that he would have this move, and as before, this is winning. So I think it's a really pretty move, even if h takes g7 maybe it's what the engine prefers, but I do like bishop c4 a lot. It's a developing move. It protects the a2 pawn, so it's defending and attacking at the same time, because it connects the rook to the bishop is nice on c4. It's hanging, but it's not hanging. It's a cool move. D takes c4, knight e4, and now after knight e4, our knight is not hanging anymore on c3, and the knight is heading to the king side. So trouble, trouble, trouble for black. Yes, there's this check on a2, and yes, there could be a check on c3 too, but we will capture it. So if knight c3, we'll capture it with the knight. Nothing happens. That would be a piece down for black. So he went rook takes d1, rook d1, and bishop a4, trying to do something about bishop takes c2, some checks, but his position is hopeless. If you see this position, you place something in the middle of the board. You see the queen side separately, you see the king side separately. What you see is that there are 4 pieces, or actually all the black pieces are on the A file, all of them. And on the king side, there's a lonely king on g8. For white, it's a similar case actually if we think about defense, but no, not the same. Because even though the rook on d1 is not protecting the b2 square, even though the knight on e4 is not protecting the a1 square, doesn't matter. Those pieces are close enough. So if you are in need of protecting your king on b1, those pieces are there. The e4 knight, even the queen could come back, the rook on d1. White's king will never be in trouble with pieces like this on the board. Your pieces are centralized, and if you have the center of the board, if you control the center of the board, it means that you can go to both flanks from the center. So centralized pieces like the knight on e4 and even the queen on f4, so in the big center, they are great because you can drive them wherever you want. So if you need, you can bring those pieces back very quickly to the queen side. But black cannot say the same about his pieces. How many moves would it take for the a2 knight to go back to f8 or to e7, somewhere decent, somewhere close to the king? At least 3 moves? how many moves it would take to the bishop, to the queen, all those pieces. If you need to bring back all those pieces to protect your king, that takes ages. You can give mate 3 times with white, while black is trying to bring back his pieces. So that's why he played bishop a4. He tries to create counterplay. That's his only option. But in this position, there are several ways to win. What Nair played is good. We'll soon see the reason why f takes e6 is such a strong move. If f takes e6, you need to find a way to finish this game, find the final blow, how to attack black's king right now, in this moment. Shout out to the quickest followers, to the quickest students of my show. This time it was Rigoletto and Martin who found the move first. It's knight f6, very good. Knight f6 check. Once again, we don't care about sacrificing a piece or two. All we care about is giving mate. Knight f6, g takes, and after queen g4, it's mate a few moves later, and the problem for black is that it all goes with forced moves. So forced moves usually mean checks. And whenever there's a check, black can do nothing about it. So look at these checks and look at this mate in the middle of the board. I know, it's beautiful. So yes, knight f6 wins the game. If you want to analyze this position more in detail, you can always find it in the database tab. So look for Nair Visochin from the year 2008, because I cannot show you all the lines, then we will be here for 6 hours discussing 2 games. But I hope that you understand the main idea. So here knight f6 is winning because all the black pieces are on the a5. So that means all the black pieces are out of our horizon. There's nobody, no piece, no bodyguard protecting the black king on g8, and that's why knight f6 works, because even if we sacrifice a piece, we will have 3 more attacking pieces, the queen, the knight, and the rook. And let's not forget about the e5 pawn. Sometimes e5 and e5 and h6 pawns are also very useful in the attack. So actually we have a whole army attacking the lonely g8 king. Bad luck for black. That's why after f takes e6 he played bishop takes c2, but it's quite desperate. All he has is a few checks. So let's just see how Nair prevented the checks. He went back to b1 because after queen a2, king c1, of course he had to calculate this all. If not, that would be trouble. If queen takes b2, then the king goes to e1, and after knight d3 he can capture this knight. So don't worry about blundering your queen. This is not a blunder here because queen f7 and queen g7 is mate. There's no time for black to capture the rook. What happened in the game was, just let's see how it finished. King d2, c3 check, but here after king e2, queen a6, there are a lot of checks, but black has sacrificed the piece for giving these checks. So even if in this position he manages to bring back the queen, remember that the queen is important in the defense, so now at least he controls a lot of squares. There's no mate with queen g5, for instance, because the f6 square is under control. But even in this position, first of all, we are a piece up, and secondly, even like this, knight f6 works. So black did not achieve anything. So he's losing one way or the other, whether you play knight f6 or you win an endgame with a piece up. Your choice. But what happened in the game was f takes e6 and knight f6 arrived, taking check, and once again, check, check, all the time. And this is a beautiful mate, rook d7. Black resigned actually after knight f6, but I want to show you why he resigned, because once again, there are many checks. Check, check, And look at this position. Look at this move. And now even the G pawn, the G2 pawn joins the attack. Who would have said that the G2 pawn would play such a big role in this game? And Rook D4, mate. I hope that you like these two games that I have showed you. The point was that, yes, we still study many, well actually we have, I think, yeah, the next couple of sessions will still be about opposite side castling because it's such an exciting topic. But what I wanted you to see is that, yes, we learn about pawn storms, but pawn storms don't always mean that you start pushing all your pawns against the opponent's king. You need to see which square you want to weaken, which file you want to open. So in this position, for instance, there was no need to push the G pawn. G4, G5 would have been a waste of time if we play G4 here. As I said, the opponent counterattacks in the center. That's such a powerful counterattack. The center is so important. Do not let that happen. Always make sure that you know what's your objective, where you want to attack. Here, all we need to do is weaken the dark squares, my favorite word, dark squares, by playing H4, H5, H6. There's no dark squared bishop in black's camp, so that's where we will win, because if we manage to have the queen on F6 with the pawn on H6, that's gonna be mate. Yes, sometimes it's not a mate immediately, so for instance, in the game after Rook FD8, H6, maybe with black I still would have played G6, and here after Queen E1, you need to actually admit that you have made a mistake with Rook FD8, you move the rook again, then you go back to D8 with the queen. At least you didn't get mated, so I prefer this. If I need to defend this position with black, I definitely would have played G6, bringing back the queen to D8, and then trying to create some attack with pushing the B pawn, either A6, B5 or immediately B5, but definitely you need to bring back the queen to D8 in order to prevent Queen H4, Queen F6, and I don't want to allow H takes G7, so I would have played G6 for sure. Still, it's a weakening move, and if you don't have sufficient counterplay on the queen side, not immediately, but your position will be worse. I mean, it's a worse position for black. You're not losing immediately, that's what I meant. So there's no winning line here for white, simply the position is better even in positional terms. So we have better control of the center, more space on the king side. The king on G8 is stuck. Even in an endgame it would be stuck. So there are many disadvantages in this position if black cannot counterattack on the queen side. And in the other game we saw the same but in a different way, because white was actually preparing the G5, H5 pawn storm that we have learned. So we had both of those pawns there. Important that you push G5 first. And once you have these pawns there, but with a defending piece, a defending knight on F8, preventing G6, then we will change the plan and we will start playing for H6. Here, even with the hanging knight on C3, H6 worked because there was no B takes C3, queen takes C3. Look how weak the G7 square is. It would be mate on G7. So I hope that you like these samples, these examples. You can find these games in our database. You know that this is the biggest online database, the biggest and fastest online database. I will show you once again how to use it in case you weren't here at the beginning of the show. And then we are done. So we go to chess24.com. That should be your home because you are here in my show. That's where I read the chat with you guys. And here, if you go to learn, analysis and coaching, then you can find the database right here under the board. So you go down and you see analysis, opening tree, and database. So if you want to find a certain game, let's say today's games, you just search for the player, and you can also search for the opponent. You can search for the year, rating, result, color, anything you like. You can also search for positions. Let's say you start, I don't know, you put any position on the board that you are curious about, let's say the Petrov, and if you want to see, I don't know, if bishop c4 is popular here, you click on database now and you see games from this position, because now the database is searching for games with the position that you have on the board. And you can do the same with games from live tournaments. You can use this database tab whether at the live tournaments or in the analysis tab. It's very useful. It has millions of games, so make sure that you use it, because in order to improve your chess, I think you need to know how to use these features on Chess24, because they are extremely useful. How do you think I have all these great games for the show? I hope that you think they are great. I love these games, so I do use this database, and I think you can do the same if you want to find these games or any other games for your improvement. I will see you next week on Wednesday, because today was just an exception. Normally this show is on Wednesday, almost always on Wednesday, so this is my weekly show about strategy. And it's on Wednesday. Next Wednesday I will see you with the live show. We're gonna learn more about the opposite side castling, and we will also practice it with a thematic tournament. So next Wednesday, remember that first we will learn, then we will practice in a thematic tournament together, so that we can put into practice what we have learned in these sessions. I hope that you like the games. Let me know what you thought about these motifs, about the h6 push, weakening the g7 square, if you have any questions. And make sure that you analyze on your own as well if you want to see something more in detail about the games that we have studied together. Have a great week, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye bye.